I wish I could go back to the exact moment I typed in David Copper to my Facebook search bar. I truly, honestly do. Because what I saw pop up in the suggestions was a life I never knew existed, a life that belonged to a man who was supposed to be my father, but who had chosen a completely different identity, a completely different family, and had effectively left the real me behind. How do you process that? How do you look at a photograph of a man who looks exactly like the person you grew up calling Dad, only he's smiling with 2 other kids and a woman who isn't your mother, and he's going by David Copper? Was I wrong for even trying to investigate? Was I wrong for wanting the truth, even if that truth tore my entire world apart? Tell me honestly, if you would have just closed the laptop and tried to forget you ever saw it, because I couldn't. The very air felt thick and wrong, and I knew in that gut-wrenching moment that the easy, comfortable lie I had been living was over. The story, the real story, starts much earlier with a seemingly perfect, ordinary life. I grew up in a small, quiet town, the only child of 2 loving parents. My mother, Sarah, was a teacher, steady and kind, the rock of our family. My father, Michael, the name I knew him by, was a carpenter, a man with calloused hands and a gentle smile. He was the kind of dad who taught me how to fish, how to change a tire, and how to believe in myself. He was present, he was attentive, he was, by all accounts, a good man. Our life was modest but happy. Every summer we'd take a trip to the coast, and every Christmas he'd build some intricate wooden toy for me. The only thing that ever felt slightly off was his past. Whenever I'd ask about his family, or where he grew up, he'd become vague, almost dismissive. He'd say things like, "It's a long, boring story, kiddo," or "We don't need to dwell on the past, we have a great life right now." It wasn't a red flag at the time. I just assumed he had a tough child, who he didn't want to talk about. My mother backed him up, always saying, "Your father is a very private man, dear." That was the narrative, and for 26 years I bought it completely. The change, the unraveling, began subtly. My mother passed away suddenly 2 years ago from a short, aggressive illness. The loss was devastating for both of us. After she was gone, my father became a ghost in his own house. He was perpetually sad, withdrawn, and occasionally I'd catch him staring into the distance with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't just grief. It was something heavier, a profound, almost guilty sorrow. I tried to help him, to talk to him, but he would push me away, insisting he was fine. Then, a few months ago, he announced he was selling the house. He said he needed a fresh start, that the memories were too painful. I understood, or thought I did. He moved 3 states away, to a city he claimed he'd always wanted to live in. We kept in touch with weekly calls, which were pleasant but still felt distant. The trigger for the whole nightmare was a simple, mundane task. I was trying to find a high school friend on Facebook, and, as I often do, I was looking through the people you may know section. It's a digital rabbit hole, right? But this time, a profile picture caught my eye. It was a man with a thick, graying beard and kind eyes, a man who looked unsettlingly like my father's older brother, if he had one. I clicked on the profile, and the name wasn't Michael. It was David Copper, and his current city, the same one my father had just moved to. I chalked it up to coincidence, a strong resemblance, but then I looked through his photos. There was one photo in particular, a candid shot from what looked like a Christmas morning. David was in the background, out of focus, but the setting, the worn leather recliner, the specific pattern on the fireplace brick. It was our house. The house my mother and father had lived in, the house he had just sold. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more photos. Then I saw the one that broke the seal on Pandora's box. It was a photo from 10 years ago, labeled, "Celebrating my 40th with my beautiful family. Love you, Brenda, Tom, and little Lisa." The man in the picture was undeniably, perfectly, my father, not Michael. David Copper. He had fewer wrinkles, less gray hair, and was beaming next to a woman who wasn't my mother, and two young children I had never seen before. The realization didn't hit me as a single shock. It was a slow, sickening dread that coalesced into a terrifying certainty. My father hadn't just moved away to grieve and find a fresh start. He had moved back to a life he had left behind. I spent the next 3 days in a fog, scouring the internet. David Copper was a seemingly real, thriving person in the community. He was a successful building contractor, not a small town carpenter. He had a wife, Brenda, and 2 children, Thomas and Lisa. Their profiles were full of family vacations, school events, and happy anniversaries. And the dates that was the kicker. The anniversary photos with Brenda and the kids started well over 30 years ago. My parents had been married for 35 years. This man, Michael/David, had been living a double life for decades. He had left one family, started another, and then, after my mother died, he had simply gone back to the first one. My mother's sorrow, his guilt, it all suddenly clicked into a horrific mosaic. She must have known. She must have been the keeper of his secret, the one who lived a half-life, protecting her husband's elaborate facade. The memory of my father's constant sadness after her passing now looked less like grief and more like the relief of finally being able to shed a skin he had worn for 30 years. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his alibi, his cover story. I felt a tsunami of emotions, confusion, betrayal, and a deep, burning rage. But mostly, I felt the hollowness of my own existence. My entire life, my memories, my identity as Michael's daughter, was built on a foundation of lies. I was an escape plan, a temporary narrative, the life he lived with Brenda and the other children. That was the original one, the real one he'd returned to. I even found a small newspaper clipping mentioning a young construction worker, David Copper, who had gone missing years ago, only to resurface later. The photo was too grainy to be sure, but the dates aligned perfectly with my father's vague past. It seemed he hadn't just left his life. He had staged his own disappearance to escape some debt or commitment, only to return to it when the opportunity arose. The timing of his recent move was too perfect to be coincidence. He hadn't gone for a fresh start, he had gone back home. So that's the situation I was in. My whole life was a lie. My deceased mother was either a complicit victim or a fool, and the man I loved was living happily ever after with his actual family. I had to make a choice. Should I walk away and nurse my wounds in private, preserving the image of the kind father I thought I had? Or should I blow up his world, reveal the decades of deceit, and expose David Copper to his other family? Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have sought revenge, or would you have chosen silence and self-preservation? I couldn't choose silence. The betrayal was too deep, the disrespect to my mother's memory too profound. I wasn't just going to let him get away with it. This wasn't just about me. It was about Brenda, Tom, and Lisa, who were living with a man who had abandoned them once and could clearly do it again. I decided to confront him, but not in a private, emotional phone call where he could spin more lies. I needed evidence, and I needed to deliver the news in a way that guaranteed maximum, unavoidable exposure. My revenge would be surgical and devastating. First, I gathered my proof. I printed out all the old photos of him with my mother, their wedding picture, my childhood photos, and I juxtaposed them with the recent David Copper family photos. The resemblance was indisputable. The two lives were now physically side by side. I wrote a long, detailed letter, recounting everything I knew, from his life as Michael the carpenter to his return as David the contractor, including the timeline of his disappearance and return. I meticulously and calmly laid out the entire deception. Then I did the unthinkable. I drove to his new city. I found the address on the David Copper Facebook profile. It was a beautiful, large house in a well-kept neighborhood. I drove past it several times, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw a cheerful-looking woman, Brenda, I realized, gardening in the front yard. I saw a car pull up, and out stepped David, my father, looking happy, relaxed, and completely whole. He waved to Brenda, kissed her, and went inside. I waited until the next morning, a Saturday, when I knew the whole family would be home. I drove to the house and parked a block away. I walked to the mailbox and, with a trembling hand, I slid my packet of evidence, the photos, and the detailed letter, addressed simply to Brenda Copper, inside. I didn't knock, I didn't linger, I simply delivered the truth. The confrontation didn't happen right away. I got back in my car and started the drive home, my entire body shaking with a strange mixture of adrenaline and grief. About 4 hours into my drive, my phone started ringing. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it. A woman's voice, sharp with controlled fury, said, "Is this Michael's daughter?" It was Brenda. She was calling from my father's phone. She didn't scream or cry. She simply stated that the police were involved. Apparently, when he realized what had happened, when he found my packet and the pictures, he panicked. He confessed everything, though I have no doubt he tried to minimize his deception. Brenda, bless her heart, had called her lawyer and the police. She told me, chillingly calmly, that David Copper was being questioned, that she was filing for an annulment based on fraud, and that she was going to tell her children everything. Her final words to me were, "You did the right thing. You saved me and my children from a ghost." The aftermath was a brutal storm. My father called me incessantly, begging, crying, screaming. He blamed me for destroying his life, for being selfish, for not understanding the complexities of his past. He claimed he loved my mother, but that Brenda was his first true love, and he'd had to leave her to protect her from some vague danger he never fully explained. I didn't buy a word of it. I blocked his number and every email address he tried to use. I later found out through an anonymous source, a friend of Brenda's, that the scandal was huge. David lost his business. Brenda moved out with her children. The community was in an uproar. He was completely alone, having lost both the families he had so cruelly used. He tried to contact me one last time through a mutual friend, leaving a message that he was going to disappear again, this time for good. I never responded. I didn't care. The man I thought was my father had died the moment I saw David Copper suggested on Facebook. What was left was just a ghost who deserved to fade away. I never saw him or heard from him again. I changed my own name legally, taking back my mother's maiden name, effectively cutting the last cord to the life of Michael's daughter. The biggest consequence was the gut-wrenching realization of my mother's pain. I can only imagine the burden she carried, the silent compromises she made. I like to think that by exposing him, I finally brought her peace too. The truth was ugly, but it was finally free. What a mess, right? It's a story that still makes me sick to my stomach, but telling it, laying out the whole sordid affair, feels like the last piece of the puzzle finally falling into place. It taught me that sometimes the most solid things in your life are just illusions, and sometimes you have to be the one to knock down the pillars to find the real ground underneath. There's no moral here about forgiveness or turning the other cheek. There's only the brutal, honest moral that deceit, even when buried for decades, will eventually claw its way back to the surface and demand payment. I made a choice to seek justice, to protect the innocent, and to honor the memory of the one person who truly deserved it, my mother. I don't regret it, not for a second. So, tell me, knowing the whole truth now, do you think I was right to destroy his double life, or should I have just let it go? Like this video if you were on my side. Subscribe for more stories like this where the truth is stranger and much darker than fiction. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.